I have a request. Someone I want to see. Sherlock Holmes.
The name's Sherlock Holmes and the address is 221B Baker Street.
You've never complained about my methods before?
I never complain. When do I complain about you practicing the violin at 3 in the morning? Or your mess?
Sorry, what? I play the violin when I'm thinking. Sometimes I don't talk for days on. And would that bother you?
That'll take every ounce of my not inconsiderable experience.
You told him about me? Not a word?
What's next to see, Watson?
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Cinema Sleuths. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And this week we are discussing Sherlock Mania, where we are looking back at the bonkers era between 2009 and 2012, when Sherlock Holmes was dominating the big and small screens with Robert Downey Jr. films and Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes series. But we're not doing this alone, are we, Matt?
Well, we have not one but two noted Holmes experts, scholars, if they will permit. Both members of the esteemed Baker Street Irregulars. We have an old friend of the podcast, Dr. Mark Jones, and Monica Schmidt. Welcome to you both.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us and having me back on the show, actually.
Yeah, we thought it'd be fun to do something a little bit different. Since we've sort of transition from Mean Streets into Cinema Sleuths, some of the ways in which we approach films and topics has morphed just ever so slightly, and so we thought, look, it would be fun to sort of look back at that particular era of Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes fandom, because I don't think there's been a period quite like that in my lifetime, at least. Maybe during the Brett era or something, maybe, but I don't know. I wasn't kicking about then, but that particular 2009 to 2012 just felt like a very unique time to be a Sherlock Holmes fan. What do you guys think? When you look back at that time, like what is that era like? What are the memories, the feelings? Monica, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the closest thing that occurred prior to the 2009-2011 stretch probably was is 74 through 76 with the rise of Nick Meyer, the popularization of and the 7% solution. But for the modern era, I mean, it's the closest thing that Sherlockians probably have had to Beatlemania. It was bonkers, and that was actually the time that I started entering into the community here in America, and so it was a very unique time. I'm glad we're past it, because there was some darkness that came with it in terms of the fandom, but it's nice to it's nice to be able to look back on it and reflect.
I agree. Mark, what about you?
Yeah, it was an amazing time, wasn't it? I mean, it was one of those eras where suddenly Sherlock Holmes was absolutely everywhere. And it wasn't just the shows that we're talking about. They inspired so many other things that then followed as well. But I think in my lifetime, I mean, there hadn't really been anything really serious since, I suppose, the end of the Brett series, which was finished in 94, I think. And so, there'd been a huge gap, a good 15-year gap. And then suddenly Sherlock Holmes was literally everywhere. And it coincided with other things that were going on. I mean, I think hugely important was the rise of social media, and particularly what was happening with social media at that time, just, the explosion, because it just, suddenly things, I remember the I Believe in Sherlock campaign, which was running across multiple social media platforms. This suddenly became kind of event television and event experience, and little old Sherlock Holmes was suddenly front of mind for everybody.
Oh yeah, to its benefit as well as to its detriment.
I agree. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I very little to add. I mean, I think the only thing that came close to this sort of explosion of activity was back in 1987. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember. which was the centenary of the publication of A Study in Scarlet. And then Holmes was everywhere then, all over TV. There's a famous Radio Times cover.
I have it. I got that.
Yeah, I've got it as well. And it's and that was sort of right in the middle of the Brett series. I think the Brett series has been going for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But as Mark says, nothing since Brett finished. It went into a real sort of. But Holmes tends to do this. He's dead popular. Then there's a slump, and then he's sort of resurrected a bit, and then there's a slump, and it just carries on. So he will return. But yeah, it sort of peaks and troughs, doesn't it? But I think this was bigger than the centenary. I think because again, as you've said, we didn't have social media back in the olden days, and now we have, for better or worse. So I think this really was a big sort of Holmes cultural focus, and as Monica says, for better or worse.
Sometimes
I think we're still sort of in some ways riding the wave, but I mean it's not really a wave anymore. It's sort of a dying breeze, some sort of like the aftermath of, it's not even a ripple anymore. It's just this slight little whisper that's just still sort of hanging on because yes, obviously Elementary was out at the time or around that time, kind of when it was kind of in its height that dropped. Netflix have done a few various Sherlock Holmes things, whether it's the Sherlock Sister stuff or the Baker Street Irregulars. There's the Young Sherlock right now on Amazon Prime. There was the now canceled Watson show. There's all this different stuff that's still sort of going on, but all of it is really sort of still a reaction to the Guy Ritchie films and the BBC. And in fact, the Young Sherlock, I'm actually kind of baffled that they aren't just making it a prequel to the Downey Jr. films, because it's Guy Ritchie, it's the same style, it's the same music-ish, more or less. So it even that doesn't feel like anything new. It feels like I've seen this before. So it's this really kind of set the tone, and we're still now it's still kind of impacting how Sherlock is presented on screen. And it's like, well, I wonder how long it'll be before a truly original version of Holmes kind of reemerges, because I just at the moment we're definitely not getting it. But I do want to add it in this particular era when the Downey films came out and stuff. I did quite freshly moved to the UK. I moved in September of 2008. The Downey film was 2009 December or something along those lines. And so this was quite a unique experience for me, because I was so thrilled to be not in the States, and to be here and just enjoying. I was in Manchester, which is a very that city is often used for filming because the city center has so many Victorian buildings still, and you can get away with a lot of stuff. So the Downey Jr. filmed there. A lot of Brett filmed there. A lot of Sherlock-y stuff is has ties to there. They also filmed Captain America: The First Avenger. I was there when they filmed one of those scenes, which was cool. Which was on the same street where they filmed one of the Downey films. So it was an interesting time to be in London, or to be in Manchester, to be in the UK during the rise of kind of Sherlock. But then I was in London when like in between series 1 and 2, I moved to London. So that added a whole nother sort of fascinating element to then be in London and start to visit the locations, to go to Speedy's Cafe and, be on Gower Streets and, go to Bart's and all that kind of stuff. Sort of, it for me it was interesting because you could kind of in some ways, I guess, like it adds that element of extra like make believe that makes it feel just a little bit more real. You're sort of you're dancing with your fiction in a slightly different way. So it was a really interesting time, and to sort of get involved with the Sherlock community around that time, but also started publishing some good and some not so good pastiches that are out there. Everyone's more than welcome to go and pick them up. But also to start actually writing professionally and publishing some Sherlock Holmes stuff was was a really interesting time. This particular period. So yeah, I think with that, I think maybe we should sort of dive in.
There isn't any time to waste then.
I guess when you were coming to the Guy Ritchie films and BBC Sherlock, what were your initial thoughts? Were you excited? Not excited? Was it trepidation? You know, what was the initial reaction? It's like, okay, here's a new film coming out. Oh, here's a new series coming out. Let's, you know, how do we react to that?
Well, I was really excited actually because I was very familiar with Guy Ritchie stuff from Lock, Stock, both the series and the film. So I mean and I thought, well, he's going to do something interesting with it. And of course, Gatiss and Moffat had both done quite a lot of Doctor Who by that point, which was the big kind of reinvented franchise from 2005. So I was very much looking forward to both of them, actually. I think I've always had a concern about the casting of Robert Downey Jr. And you will hear throughout this podcast that I haven't really got over that.
You're not alone.
Yeah,
You're not alone.
Let's go.
But, which is why I checked beforehand that we're allowed to swear on the podcast. But yeah, I was really excited about it, and I think they come from very different traditions, don't they? And that was one of the interesting things about both these things coming together at the same time, because I think Guy Ritchie signed on around 2008, I think it was, for a 2009 release. And then BBC Sherlock was announced in 2009. So, you know, they weren't feeding off. It's not like we have today where everything is a kind of variant of the original pandemic. You're getting all these mutant strains now of from the Guy Ritchie and the BBC Sherlock era. At that point, it was two things genuinely happening at the same time. And I wish I could say, oh, well, it was all because of X, but I've never found the central thing that connects the two, as it were. I think it was just serendipity. But I was inherently excited about both of them. I thought, good, you know, great. Get it back on television, get it back in the cinemas.
No, I actually felt very similarly. I mean, you know, for me, I grew up watching Brett on PBS mystery series, and I absolutely fell in love with Sherlock Holmes through Brett. Actually, my Sherlockian tattoo has Brett's signature as Sherlock Holmes. You know, and so, you know, like I am a die-in-wool Brettian. But the problem is that, you know, through the late 90s, early 2000s, we had the Matthew Frewer series, which was, you know, popped in and popped out. There was, I think there was a film with Jonathan Pryce that popped in, you know, I mean, so there's these throwaway movies. And so like, we'll just say I was really excited, and it was actually Christmas Day of 2009 that it was released here in America for the first Robert Downey Jr. movie. And my poor husband, you know, actually, you know, didn't realize what was about to be unleashed. You know, because what we'll just say, he lived with me as a Sherlock Holmes enthusiast, but not someone connected to the Sherlockian community at this point. But it was actually the return of return of Sherlock Holmes to the cinema, so the Robert Downey Jr. film, and the experience of seeing the film theatrically on Christmas Day that really inspired me to start seeking out the community and making connections. And actually, it kind of blends into like it was late July of 2010 when I actually attended my first Sherlock Holmes event in the States, the Norwegian Explorers of Minnesota triannual conference. And at that time, I was literally the only person in the room other than Les Klinger and Peter Blau, who are two very venerable and seasoned Sherlockians, who had actually seen BBC Sherlock first two episodes because I used the VPN to pirate them from BBC on BBC iPlayer because I was just at this moment new, obsessed. Let's check it out.
I relate to a lot of that. Yeah, you know, actually thinking about the Guy Ritchie film, that was growing up. I didn't really. I guess I would have had access to Brett via PBS, but it wasn't anything that ever kind of fell in front of me. I was aware of Sherlock Holmes. I read Sherlock Holmes as a kid. I remember watching and really liking the cartoon Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century. But no, it was the Guy Ritchie film that also kind of reinvigorated my interest and my passion in it. And I remember instantly going and seeing the film, and then instantly going to Waterstones, and they had the whole canon in one in a paperback collection for £6, which I thought was a bit nuts. And so it was insanely cheap for how much you're getting there. It was all novels, all short stories, and one big tome. And so I picked that up and started reading them and devouring them, and it'd been a while since I'd watched anything Sherlock Holmes. So that Downey film, I went in with sort of no expectations.
Mhm.
Ended up I watched it, I ended up liking it, then I read the books, and then I could kind of see from going from the Downey film into the books kind of where the kind of reinterpretation was sort of coming from. Like it sort of worked for me in a different way than maybe if I'd been super massively steeped into it previously.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I think I went into that really intrigued and came out loving it. And then for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's because I was doing my undergrad at the time, I had no idea that Sherlock was even coming out. It wasn't until I was I was over at what would have been my girlfriend at the time, over at her house at her parents' house, and her brother was watching Sherlock, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" He's like, "Oh, it's this new Sherlock show." I was like, "What?" And then we started to watch it, and I was like, "How long is this stupid thing?" And I was like, "Oh, it's like 3 films." I was like, "Oh, that's amazing." So then, and this was The Blind Banker that they were watching, because I missed the first one. I didn't even know the first one had come out, and then I went back and watched it. So again, I went into that because I only watched a little bit of Blind Banker and really enjoyed it, and then sort of just found myself loving both, and was sort of in a little happy Sherlock bubble, and then sort of expanded from there. So I didn't really go into either of these with any sort of I didn't have any preconceived ideas of what I thought it should be, what I thought Holmes should be. So that was an interesting experience, because over the years I now have a very different opinion when something new comes out, and I have reevaluated both of these franchises, and I have differing opinions on them since their release. But we'll get into that. But Matt, what about you?
Well, I feel I'm going to be a lone voice because I went into both of these with extreme caution. I wasn't a fan of Robert Downey Jr. I wasn't a fan of Guy Ritchie. I wasn't a fan of Stephen Moffat. I wasn't a fan of Mark Gatiss. I wasn't a fan of Martin Freeman. So I won't
be tagging either of those guys when we release this episode.
The cards were stacked against it, I'm afraid. But and I went to the cinema to see the Robert Downey Jr. film, and I went for 2 reasons. One, out of a real sense of Holmesian duty, and one because I'd never seen a Sherlock Holmes film in the cinema, because the last cinema film will have been something like Murder by Decree or something.
Young Sherlock Holmes, probably.
Young Sherlock Holmes.
And
I didn't
we
go see
also-
that. I think I was just getting into Holmes then. So I've never seen a Holmes film at the cinema, so I went, and I will say, on first viewing, I was sort of pleasantly surprised, surprisingly. And the same with BBC Sherlock. I was surprised at that. I had so much sort of angst about it that I suppose it couldn't have possibly gone any worse than I was already expecting. So it could only have gone up. But yeah, I was quite surprised by when I saw the first episode of Sherlock and I saw the first Downey Jr. film. I was quite surprised. Downey Jr. is not my idea of Sherlock Holmes at all. And they started to show some pictures online, and I thought, before I'd seen it, I thought, that's what he looks like. That's what he's going to look like. No, he must be in disguise.
Yeah,
I thought he was in disguise as a chimney sweep or something. But no, that's how he was going to look. But yeah, and a bit like Luke, I thought, well, I can see there were some bits that I thought were fairly canonical in that first film that had just been slightly tweaked, which we'd perhaps come on to. But going into it, I was when they were both announced, I was very sort of, oh dear,
Okay.
But
Nice. Well, all right. Let's get into tone and style of the two. Now, the 2009 film Sherlock Holmes, that's that's proper Victorian era. Well, meant to be proper. But it's clearly infused with a little bit of steampunkness. Guy Ritchie's very unique stylized action, the slow-mo stuff. It's very much an action adventure film. Did Guy Ritchie's style and tone, did that work for you? Because I'll start first, actually, because I went in with no preconceived ideas, I found it to be a very refreshing and different experience of a Sherlock Holmes story. I really liked what they called in like the behind the scenes, the Holmes vision. I liked the way he was doing deductions. The slow-mo stuff. He's thinking so fast. He's like the Flash, right? He's thinking so fast that everything is going so slow. And he can kind of predict. I thought that was a really clever, fun thing. I thought, the general sort of action style of it was a lot of fun. I thought the look and feel of the world that they created, that version of Victorian, that kind of steampunk Victorian London that they had, felt very gritty and dirty, and I liked that better than a lot of other home stuff, because in some ways that was just a little bit more authentic, because London, it was a shithole. Back when I was researching my PhD, like I said, I was writing a historical thriller. And one of the things that was very interesting was looking back at what London was like even at that period, but then looking back further at Sherlock Holmes and sort of the way Golden Age fiction sort of in a lot of ways turned a little bit of a blind eye to socio-political problems. For example, Baker Street during Holmes' period would have been messy, would have been riddled with homelessness. There's literally workhouses right next door to them. At no point in any of Sherlock Holmes' canon do you feel that sense of Holmes being that close to depravity. So I like the fact that this was just a little bit of a more gritty metropolitan feeling, interpretation, not interpretation, but sort of an awareness of London. So I really enjoyed that particular aspect. But Monica, what about you? Tone and style. What's your take?
Well, tone and style. Again, I appreciated the steampunk aspect, and because I was a Diane Wilbredian, I actually appreciated, some of the visual cues back to the Brett, especially the Granada introduction. Basically, the first swooping in on 221B in the Robert Downey Jr. film is basically the swooping in, essentially almost following exactly the same camera movements as the introduction for the Jeremy Brett Granada series. There's also a nice throwback to the 1939 Adventures of Sherlock Holmes with Basil Rathbone, with the playing with the violin and the fly.
Yes, I love that.
And so there's all these like references about what previously was, as well as the establishment of what is now. I love the grittiness, I love the dirtiness, but I also appreciate the fact that Downey Jr. was, while his accent is workable and passable, we'll just say previously having been nominated for an Oscar for playing Charlie Chaplin, and he did a fine job, but he's just too short. Just not perfectly the right type. I did appreciate, again, that Holmes vision, which basically was done similarly but differently in BBC Sherlock, and I appreciate, the ability for the filmmakers, to basically ramp up the visual depiction of the intellectual process of Holmes, which is something that was completely brand new here. But on first viewing, I just kind of sat there when we were in 221B for the first time, and I'm like looking around, and it's slovenly, and I'm just like, wow, this is like a dorm room. Where are the pizza boxes stacked in the back? Where's the pyramid? I'm waiting for, it just felt like a little bit out of place until I kind of reinterpreted it as almost like a gritty Victorian James Bond, and then that makes me feel a little bit better about kind of how this film went. But again, action, basically what we would say is splody. Just lots of fun explosions. But it was exciting and interesting to watch. But again, I went in not necessarily expecting it to be great. I went in expecting it to be essentially what it was because, again, I'm familiar with, the Guy Ritchie, canon, so to speak. And I was, pleasantly surprised. And it was entertaining for my husband, who's not really a Sherlockian. So that was an extra bonus, is that, the non-fan, could find this film accessible. And so, I enjoyed it from that aspect as well.
Yeah. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the use of the Holmes vision was really good. I really enjoyed that because, I mean, I see these movies very much in that action adventure buddy comedy kind of tradition. And the other thing that it probably feeds into this as well is, Downey Jr. had just done Iron Man, hadn't he? So Marvel was kicking off again. That was 2008, wasn't it? It was
2008.
Yeah. So you've got this whole thing about, how do you bring these incredible larger than life characters? And Sherlock Holmes is, the original great crusader, as we say. He how do you bring a superhero whose power is intellect to life on the screen? And it was a really interesting way of doing that. I think the other thing that obviously Guy Ritchie borrows from more is he's much more interested in that kind of visceral, pugilistic side of Holmes. And I actually watched it again recently. I watched it a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't seen it in 10 years. And I was actually really pleasantly surprised by the treatment of the Victorian era, but also the fact that what I originally took as being this kind of throwaway, oh my God, this fight sequence at the beginning where Guy Ritchie's going to throw all his camera trickery at it, it kind of makes much more sense in context watching it again. Holmes is ballsed up and actually he's going into the ring almost to punish himself. And I thought, there's actually something a little bit psychological going on here as well, which, yes. So I think there are elements in which the Guy Ritchie movies do have a kind of slightly deeper layer to them. I'm astonished to say, but also I think they do. I think actually their focus is primarily on the fun side. It's a fun ride, isn't it? And the fact that they can pair that with a pretty good version of Victorian London. The one thing I disagree with Monica about, though, is that accent. That accent's not passable. That, I can tell you now.
Fair.
Accent,
I'm an American. I don't know what I'm talking about.
He's better when he's playing Chaplin. His accent is better.
He is.
Yeah.
It's as good as my Boston accent. Let's put it that way.
I look forward to hearing that one.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said, really. I think the depiction of the Victorian era is certainly, in inverted commas, more realistic than you tend to get in Sherlock Holmes films. Perhaps matched only by Murder by Decree. But I also like the Holmes vision. I think that is, as Mark says, a really clever way and a visually interesting way of showing the power that this man has that is totally internal. It's a very clever way of doing it. And I watched that sort of first fight scene and just thinking about the Sign of Four when he talks with McMurdo about beating him in the back rooms of Allison's or whatever it is, thinking, well, yeah, this is, given my trepidation going in, I was thinking, actually, that this is quite shaping up to quite faithful in a way.
Yeah.
Because we'd never really seen Sherlock Holmes, the back pub room brawler, before.
Yeah.
And here he was writ large. And I was quite enjoying it by this point, I have to say. But I agree, Downey Jr. is, as I say, not my idea of Holmes. And the minute Mark Strong walked onto the screen, I thought, why haven't we cast him?
Oh God, yeah.
Why have we not got him? Because he at least looks the part. It looks good. It's the Holmes vision is really effective, and it sort of eased me into a film that I wasn't sure I was going to like.
I think you said something right there as well about how faithful it feels. I mean, I was really surprised again on this rewatch to see how many nods there are back to the original stories, as you were saying, Monica. But also, it's done in an affectionate way. I think one of the issues I have with later BBC Sherlock is that the distance from the source material. And I'm not bothered about it being a faithful adaptation. I don't care. It's a different medium. It should be different. But the distance from the source material, where it becomes more obsessed with its own story than actually what it's about, you end up with, it just becomes this unreal thing that's got no connection to what brought people to the franchise in the first place. Exactly. And that's where I think it's really interesting watching the Ritchie stuff again. Even you get it a bit in the second movie as well. There are nods all the time, and it's done from a point of affection. Whereas I think, in a weird way, BBC Sherlock, particularly later on, it doesn't feel terribly affectionate anymore.
No. It basically feels like it's preening at itself, looking in the mirror and basically saying, how clever am I? Which is what we get right at the end of season 2, beginning of season 3, but we're getting ahead of ourselves there. But I'm right there with you.
I agree with that, because also take it a little bit further. When we look at just the wider cinema landscape, we look at Star Wars or Star Trek or other things around at the moment, they are sort of, you get something like in the Star Trek world, maybe something like Lower Decks or Strange New Worlds, where they're sort of poking fun at itself in a way that's almost like we're embarrassed to be what we are. And you sort of get a lot of that within various franchises today. So I appreciate that Guy Ritchie's films and particularly the first 2 seasons of Sherlock generally, came at it with like, we love these stories, we love these characters, we're going to do our thing with it, but we're not doing that because we dislike it or we think we can do it better. It's just that we love these bits. Let's do a fun Sherlock stuff. Okay, yeah, let's do it our way, but we love this bit, we love that bit. Let's put it all together. And so I do really appreciate that sort of component to both franchises. But I guess in sort of kind of the contrast with tone and style with the Ritchie films, and you have the Moffat Gatiss show, and I think one of it was such a obviously it's serendipity, they're both happening at the same time, but I think what a good thing that they were both picking different eras to put themselves in. I think if that hadn't been the case, who knows what would have happened. Who knows? But I think the modern this sort of having both a modern Holmes and a historical Holmes made the fandom, made that journey just a little bit more exciting, because you could I loved the use of the current day London setting. As Monica was saying, I like that both sort of found an active way of showing the deductions and making that part of the action as it were, and the fact that, look, they're both doing action stuff, they're both doing a little bit of slow-mo here and there, but there's still a lot of, they're both very unique in their own ways. They don't actually feel like they're stepping on each other's toes. It's such a fascinating period, because you're getting 2 very distinct voices or interpretations of Sherlock Holmes, the 2 very distinct voices. And the way the BBC does the overlay of like the maps, and you're seeing how he's working out like where the cab is going, and in his mind, and little thought palace stuff, and Moffat's really good use of sort of that rapid, fast dialogue, but modern day bohemian aspects without being super over the top like some of the Guy Ritchie stuff. But then the way they brought in the humor, Guy Ritchie's very buddy comedy, as Mark, you were saying, this is less buddy comedy, but it's still got buddy aspects and comedy aspects. So let's run through Turn of Style. Let's on BBC. So we'll start with you, Matt. What was your sort of take when you're watching this and taking it in?
Well, again, my gut reaction was, oh dear, modern day, why are we doing this? But I sort of had a word with myself, because I thought, well, hang on. When Doyle was writing these stories originally, they were contemporary. And what's more, he's writing in the early stories about 2 young men, and what I thought was great about the first BBC Sherlock episode in particular, and in the first 2 series, was that sense of these are 2, this relationship felt really canonical to me.
Yes.
You know, exactly the one that Doyle presented, almost, but as near as damn it, the one that Doyle presented in a modern, in their contemporary world, just as Holmes and Watson were in their contemporary world. And one of those opening scenes where they're at the press conference in the Study in Pink, and the text messages come as words on the screen instead of everyone sort of looking at the phones and getting a close-up of the phone screen. I just thought, you'd never seen it before. I thought, this is brilliant stuff. You know, this is a real signature sort of style to this show, and we're getting it right from the off. And I found it really exciting. The minute it started, I found it really exciting. And the fact that it was called A Study in Pink, the fact that you kept seeing this cab in the background, I thought, we're going to be quite faithful here as well. You know, it was promising so much. And I think when you first see Baker Street again, as Monica was saying before about Downey Jr. film, I think you see the sign first, and that's another sort of Granada harkback.
Exactly.
And I was just like, I'm well into this now. I am totally invested in this. And it was because it was set in the modern day. The one thing that I feared about it was the very thing that made it seem perfect to me, because I said to myself, they were contemporary characters in their own right in the original stories. And then everything started to make sense. Text messages instead of telegrams. Smoking patch because you can't sustain a smoking habit in London anymore. All this stuff just nod back to the originals, but updated. Watson's got a blog, you know, instead of writing a journal. It was just all so good and exciting.
I will admit, I was hyper excited when it came out, primarily because I was being naughty, and as I said, I was pirating it from the BBC. So I got to see this before most Americans because it aired in July of 2010 in the UK. It didn't air until October of 2010 in the US. And so, I kind of got to see it before it became kind of this big cultural phenomenon in America. So from the first minute, the opening sequence in basically in the battle in Afghanistan, I just kind of sat there, eyes wide open, jaw dropped, dumbfounded, because I'm like, this is pulling straight from the canon, and nobody basically adapts that aspect of like Study in Scarlet. So I knew from the first second that I was watching the episode that we were in for something that was a really good, maybe not high fidelity adaptation, but in the spirit of and modernization of the stories. There's the as you mentioned, Matt, the modern kind of examples of things that were ripped from the canon. My favorite is, of course, the watch scene where Holmes is examining Watson's watch in the Sign of Four, and then of course in BBC Sherlock, it's established with the cell phone. I mean, it just felt like it was absolutely spot on. When I watched this, I was grinning ear to ear. I kind of felt like Felix the Cat or South Park Terrence and Phillip, because I think I was grinning to the top end, at that point, because I was grinning so large just because I thought I was seeing the second coming of Christ, essentially.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like at that moment, just because it was the first time that I'd seen anything that was like a modern adaptation that actually got it. And it felt so amazing and so exciting when it came out that I couldn't wait to tell people. And then 2 weeks later, I go to my first Sherlockian event, and literally only 2 other people in the room, of 150 people at this event had seen it. And I was so bummed because I just wanted to share my exuberance and gush about it. And there was just minimal opportunity.
Mark.
I love the overlay stuff straight away. I thought it was a brilliant innovation. And in fact, there's a stage play running in the UK at the moment where they overlay. It's set in the Victorian era, but they overlay the telegram appearing over the back of the set. So it's gone into the kind of parlance of how this stuff is done, which is quite fun. The great irony about setting it in the present day, I thought that was the best single thing about it. But ironically, it's not the most original thing about it, is it? Because, I mean, Rathbone had updated it to the water era. Eileen Norwood in the 1920s had updated it to the 1920s. And it's funny what you're saying, Matt, about, thinking, I'm not sure how it's going to work in the present day. I mean, Conan Doyle was critical of the Norwood films because he says, well, you've got guns and motor cars, and Holmes never had that. But actually, it goes to the heart of why I think the overlay is really interesting as a technique, because I'm sure, guys, we've spoken about previously about the difficulties of, setting things out of the golden era of detective fiction, because there are certain limitations in, the flow of data and information and the pace of life that actually you suddenly have to contend with when you're setting it in the present day or the near present day. And suddenly BBC Sherlock comes along and it's like, yeah, that's not a problem. We just fix it a different way. And there are a couple of times where they have to be a bit clunky about these things, but actually, for the most part, they do it really, really cleverly, and that, I think, is no mean feat. The bit about London itself, we often say about Hound of the Baskervilles that the Moor is a character, and in the canon, London is a character. So the fact that you get this really rich version of modern London, I think, is one of the real strengths of BBC Sherlock. And in fact, I think it was Moffat said, maybe during the run he was interviewed, and I think he said something like he wanted to fetishize modern London in the same way as the Victorian era. That those versions had sort of fetishized the Victorian era. And when you know that, and you look back at what he's doing with the production, I do think you get that sense of it. And of course, it tied in with other things. 2012 is obviously the Olympics in London. I think that brought a whole sense of confidence to the country. And this was a kind of second phase of Cool Britannia, as it were. But also, it's the same year as you get this massive uptake, like 50% of the population gets smartphones. So, you've got social media. So suddenly it's using all the stuff that is, to hand, and we've all got in our pockets, and it's there on screen. So I think that's, it's an amazing aspect of BBC Sherlock that, I think we can still commend it for to this day. For all the other things that we might not want to commend it for, that's one of the things I think you'd want to stick with, because that in London, I think, is just fantastic.
Yeah. I'm fully with you guys on all of that. Okay, let's transition into characterizations.
You've never complained about my methods before?
I never complain. When do I complain about you practicing the violin at 3 a.m, or your mess, your general lack of hygiene, or the fact that you steal my clothes?
Robert Downey Jr.'s Holmes and Jude Law's Watson. I'm interested. What do you guys make of these interpretations? We've sort of poked at Downey's accent, Downey's height, but do we? What's your take on both of them as individuals and as a dynamic, as a duo? I mean, did it work for you overall, or do you sort of have to watch it with a bit of like, if only? Because for me, when I first saw these films, I loved them, and I still have some affection for them. A lot of the affection is actually more rooted in the tone and style, and also in the music that Hans Zimmer did for this. I think in general, I buy the dynamic between the two of them. I do buy Downey as a version of Holmes. If we're going multiverse, fine, whatever. And the multiverses of, it works. I can buy it to a bit. I do think as time has gone on, I do think Downey's Holmes wears thin. But I like him more in the first film. I do think by the time we get to the second, I don't know if it's that Downey Jr. has become the victim of his own re-success, his newfound second wind, that he's able to just be even more eccentric, even more over, goofy. Whereas there was just an element of restraint to his kookiness in the first one. But I will say I do love the dinner scene. I thought that was one of the best scenes in that film, when Watson brings Mary to meet Holmes, and Holmes is so pissed off about Watson getting married, and she wants the deduction thing to happen, and they're both like, you don't want it to happen, and Holmes is like, all right, fine, fuck it, here I go. You're you're a poor ass motherfucker. You should be marrying my my best friend who's a doctor. You gold digger. And then she throws the wine in his face, and he just sort of sits there sad. It was a little bit blank, but I think there is an element of sadness to his eyes. There's something that Downey is doing in that scene, that there's an emptiness, but also there is a little bit of emotion behind the emptiness. So I his first outing, I really liked his portrayal of Holmes. It wears thin by the second one, and nowadays on rewatches, I enjoy it mostly, but I even find the first one wearing a little bit thin. But I do buy the dynamic between the two of them. I think the scene where Holmes is holding he's got the stick and he's pointing it at Watson. He's like, get that out of my face. He gets, not in your face, it's in my hand. He's like, get what's in your hand out of my face. That to me showed that as actors, they're both really buying into their roles, and they're so effortlessly coming across as that odd couple pairing, that buddy comedy goofiness. So in many ways they sold it to me, but I do find particularly Downey's Holmes gets a little bit exhausting as the franchise continues. But what about you guys? Monica, start with you.
Well, I mean, actually, I don't disagree with the assessment whatsoever. The first time that I saw the film, or the first film, I should say, I kind of thought, wow, this Sherlock Holmes, they've definitely amplified the adventurous aspect of it. They amplified, kind of, it feels a little swashbuckly in its own way, which I enjoy. But so they amplified that, but they also amplified the fact that he's kind of a ginormous dick. It's like I can understand Holmes being rude, but there are certain things that I think, in terms of social conventions, that even Holmes wouldn't cross. And I think they had Robert Downey Jr. in that, or his Holmes, in that scene in particular that you were referencing with the dinner with Mary. I think crossed the line. But then again, it also harkens back to said watch scene with Watson, and basically Holmes crossing the line there. But had he previously done that, which I think contemporaneously, we'll just say, who knows where it is in the Robert Downey Jr. Cinematic universe timeline. But under the circumstances, he just felt like he was a little too unrestrained to basically fit within that particular cultural context. That said, I found it. I'll just say I found his portrayal, to, at least be different, some which made it interesting. But I agree, it wore thin, as the film went on, with the eccentricities. I mean, as well as just kind of, it just felt a little like over the top and off the deep end. Now, on the flip side, Jude Law, I could buy him as Watson all day, every day.
Absolutely. To the extent, I would say that it's almost a shame he's in this film, and he's not Watson in a overall better film, because I think he's one of the standouts for me.
Agreed.
He's one of the best Watsons we've seen in recent years. Downey Jr. I can't disagree with Monica on any of that. I think he's. Holmes is eccentric. Holmes is rude. But I don't think Holmes is this much of an arse, to be honest. I think he's certainly aware of how to conduct himself in social situations. There's countless examples of that in the stories. This is almost like the Holmes that lives in 221B that the public don't see. And there's probably a reason why the public don't see it. It's like without Watson's filter. Holmes is just this horrendous person to live with, almost. This isn't my Sherlock Holmes. But for the story this is telling, for this version of it, to the multiverse, these two do work together. The buddy thing does work in the context of this film. But I just wish Jude Law's Watson was with Mark Strong's Holmes in a faithful adaptation of one of Doyle's stories. What can I say?
I want to chime in on one thing, because I do take the point that what he does is rude and goes a little bit too far. I do think it's probably worth noting that it's Holmes isn't like that. He doesn't push it that far all the time. Downey's Holmes. He pushes it with Lestrade, but he has history with Lestrade. He's pushing it with Watson because he doesn't want to lose his best friend, and he's being ass about it. So I do think it's probably worth a bit of sort of there is an awareness of sort of what those scenes are doing, and because he's I think he does have aware of social. I think Downey's Holmes does have that awareness. Because I'm jumping ahead just ever so slightly, but we won't get into detail. I would probably say that Cumberbatch's Holmes is a far bigger dick than Downey's. I think Downey's Holmes demonstrates a lot of love for Watson, and a lot of care for the people around him. Even including Irene Adler, Mrs. Hudson, everything, everyone that he's sort of around. He might poke at Lestrade, but he still knows that Lestrade is good and valuable, and stuff like that. So he does cross the line a few times, but I think it's sort of in context. It's this person is taking, he doesn't have the. He's pissed off. He's losing his best friend. He's acting out in a way that is immature and unacceptable. But I mean, we've all probably done various aspects of that. So I kind of don't mind it. It's more his goofiness, like where he's being drugged, when he's druggy and drunk and goofy, like that to me is where I'm like, dial that stuff back down. But I will say, I do think his version of Holmes definitely begins to set the trend for jackass Holmes that we are still dealing with today. And it's almost like people now sort of reinterpreted Holmes as a jackass, when actually he's not a jackass. They were just, these two interpretations were sort of playing with a slightly more, exaggerated version of Holmes like that. But Matt, to your point, Watson, I have almost nothing bad to say about. I have nothing bad to say about Law's Watson. Actually, I think he is. I think he's perfect.
Looks the part, carries the part. Just, I believe he's an old soldier. I believe he's got an experience of women over 3 continents. I believe all that. I believe all that.
And as the woman in the room, I would say so do I.
Mark, give us your take on these guys.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I think it must have been really hard for both these lead actors to approach this role, which was so well known and so synonymous with certain actors in the past, and that it puts them under pressure to come up with something deliberately different. And I think one of the things that is a consistent difficulty with both of them is that they need to know where the comedy is coming from. I think comedy is a really important part of Sherlock Holmes. I think it goes right back to Conan Doyle stories. There are very funny moments in the Sherlock Holmes stories. They are not dry. They are witty. They have moments of laugh out loud humor. Holmes himself has a capacity for humor as well. My problem with Robert Downey Jr. is that the comedy often comes from him. If you think about Rathbone, it came from Nigel Bruce because they thought that they couldn't hurt the central character by making him the comedy. In BBC Sherlock, it's much more about the interplay, I think. But in Robert Downey Jr., I just think that for the tiny moments where he is introspective, or like the dinner table scene, or you get that moment where he might be deliberately self-punishing himself in the fight scene at the beginning, those kind of moments of psychology, for the most part, he's a dick. And Robert Downey Jr.'s character annoys the hell out of me. I find him almost entirely unwatchable now. And in fact, when I watched the last two movies for this, the desperation to reach for the remote control whenever he was on screen and to skip was so high. I actually had to put the remote control at the other side of the room because I just thought, I just can't stomach this guy. I just find him impossible. But the one thing I would say about it is that I find the relationship between Holmes and Watson in the Ritchie movies much more believable than the Holmes and Watson relationship in Sherlock. I just do not buy that at all. And so I think there is something about it being a gentler action adventure buddy comedy that actually lends itself to the way that Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law play it. But I think there's a bit of a fundamental problem with the approach with BBC Sherlock.
Well, Mark, I mean, there's no better segue into the BBC version.
Your blog, or better still, stop inflicting your opinions on the world.
Benedict Cumberbatch, Martin Freeman. This is sort of a nowadays as an iconic casting. Robert Downey's Holmes definitely sort of begins the arrogant jackass Holmes, and Cumberbatch sort of takes that maybe to another level. This is definitely a Stephen Moffat, Mark Gatiss interpretation. That is so abundantly clear from the way both of these actors, or both the way that these characters are portrayed and how their dialogue is, and it's sort of Sherlock. No, it's sort of Doctor Who, but if the Doctor was a complete and total piece of shit.
Totally valid, by the way.
Now, this is a bit like what I was saying before. And we've all said that we watched BBC and ended up quite enjoying it. I thoroughly enjoyed that, A Study in Pink. I thought, there's definitely some eccentricities. There's some very 2010 humor that is happening. That's sort of the rise of that sort of, very cutting humor. Those sort of characters that quote unquote tell it like it is, but is, really just an excuse to be a jerk. That was really coming into vogue. I mean, Iron Man, was nothing but that. He's Tony Stark, so he can do and say whatever he wants. Those characters were just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger on the big and small screen. So it didn't jar. I don't think when I saw both of these iterations and when I saw Benedict's Sherlock kind of doing the same thing. It was the vogue at the time. But he's got the stamp of I'm a high functioning sociopath. He's doing the mega intelligence stuff. But like what? He's super smart, but he can't. But I guess a bit like Downey, so he can't read the fucking room. Like, really?
Yeah, I can weigh in a little bit here as a professional mental health counselor. I think, we'll just say one of the things that I think that they were trying to do is basically do a version of Holmes that probably has a personality disorder of some kind.
Yeah.
Again, high functioning sociopath, not psychopath. Both of them fall under antisocial personality disorder. I actually wrote an essay in a BSI Press book. It was the manuscript series on Charles Augustus Milverton analyzing Holmes, the canonical Holmes, looking at modern diagnostic standards for those personality disorders, just to kind of explore the difference between sociopathy and psychopathy and what clinically they look like. And the canonical Holmes does not fit that at all whatsoever. Small spoilers. But I think, again, that grittiness, as you've noted, was in vogue. And I think that was kind of their out to be able to portray that in a way that felt different and fresh at that era. On the other side, or kind of on the flip side, the portrayal of Watson's PTSD, I think, is actually far more realistic and exceedingly well handled. And I'm lucky enough where I've been able to look at that more from a more learned clinical perspective. I've done presentations, for major universities for the Humanities and Medicine series, and actually coming up in September, I'm going to be doing actually a presentation using European diagnostic standards for the Sherlock Holmes Society of London's September symposium in Cambridge, just because it's so misunderstood. And at least within the context of BBC Sherlock, though, it's appropriately portrayed. And that as a clinician, there's nothing worse that pulls me out of like my suspension of disbelief when watching a movie or a TV show, as to when something clinically is poorly portrayed.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I was really taken by the portrayal of Watson. I love the fact that we are seeing him in therapy, and I mean that first scene of him with his therapist, and him, he's saying so much by saying so little. It's a phenomenal performance by Martin Freeman, and it's a phenomenal character moment. And it's one of those things where it's like, everyone loves Sherlock. He's the star of the show. I think I kind of gravitated more towards Watson in this version of Sherlock Holmes, even more so than the Jude Law, because maybe Jude Law didn't have enough to do, whereas this version of Watson is a much deeper, intricate, I think portrayal than I think we've gotten sort of in a very very long time. So I love that. I love that stuff. Mark, what's your take on the Watson side of this and the Benedict side of this?
I might be slight. I really enjoy watching the first two seasons of this. I like both of them in their performances. I have a real problem with Cumberbatch's Sherlock in that I just do not buy this idea that he can be so emotionally unintelligent as to be callous, and that's the thing that I just find repellent actually in his Holmes. I cannot believe in a million years that Holmes doesn't care about somebody dying or being so blatantly against social norms as to be very deliberately callous. And if they were to play that as a kind of, it's all a protective shield, actually he's a soft center, and this is all a carapace and all the rest of it, I would have bought it. But they don't do that. That's not what happens. I think Martin Freeman's performance, particularly in that first season, is very good. I think the problem with both is that basically they forget it after that. It's forgotten about. So when I coming back to what I was saying earlier about not buying the relationship, it's because I don't think it's emotionally earned. When you get to the end of the second series, I just don't. I cannot see why Watson would hang around with this dick for this amount of time, and I don't understand why. Why the kind of why the audience should really believe that there is something between these two guys. I don't get anything really from Cumberbatch's Holmes that gives him any real sense of warmth, and I think they introduce that. There are elements to it as well, but I never really bought it as being a part of the character. It felt too performative to me, and so. I know that's not the conventional view of it, but I just think, when you have Watson is always the audience surrogate, but when you think about, could he really live with somebody like this? Could he really function around somebody like this? I mean, Holmes takes abuse to an entirely new level. This is not the kind of throwaway stuff. So, I find that's why I find bizarrely their relationships less believable than Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr.
People say, why would Holmes put up with Bruce's Watson? And what you're saying, Mark, is why would Freeman's Watson put up with Cumberbatch's Holmes?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm thinking about it. Like I definitely agree to a point, but I think I do buy a lot of the. I think I buy their general sort of friendship up until about Hound of the Baskervilles, or was it Hounds of the Baskerville? I can't remember how they. I don't remember where they put the S in that title.
Yeah, it's actually the funny thing is the only reason why I remember is because there's a Sherlockian organization out of Chicago that is the way that they do it in the show. So it's the Hounds of the Baskervilles.
There we go. Because I think back to the first episode, and I think I do buy that Holmes is intrigued by Watson. I think he does see him as a man of action. I think he does see him as someone valuable. I think there, he does a lot of rude things along the way, but he's not doing anything so rude just yet that's like, oh man, screw this guy. But at the same time, being having lived in London and lived in at the time and knowing how expensive places are, if you suddenly land the situation where you're living on Baker Street with this dude and you can somehow make it work, and you're going on fun adventures, okay. I might buy into some of his eccentricities, and I mean, I've had flatmates before who have been. So you kind of put up with a lot of stuff, but what I will say, the pool scene I think demonstrates a lot of care on Cumberbatch's side for him for Watson. When Watson is there's this moment where he it's sort of played as if Watson is, for a second you think Watson might not be who he is the whole time, but it's clear that it's actually Moriarty in an earpiece, and so I really buy that as a signifier that yes, these guys are definitely friends now. Now, when we get to Hound of the Baskervilles, and Sherlock becomes an epic cunt and has Watson as an skinny fucking pig in the laboratory, that for me was just too far. Too far.
Yeah. I mean, but what you're talking about there with the moment in the pool and the great game, the end of the first series, is that it speaks to what was going on in that first series, which is that there is an arc over those 3 episodes. I think by the time you get to the second episode, there isn't an arc anymore. There's just a set of characteristics, and people are going to be put together. And the 2 episodes I watched in advance of this, just to refresh my memory, were actually the great game, that episode with the pool, and I thought, do you know what? I really enjoyed that episode at the time. I really enjoyed it again watching it this time round. And then I watched the Reichenbach Fall, and I just thought, oh my God, like in the space of 1 year, you have just completely shot yourself in the foot. I mean, it's all performative. It's all about the event. It's not about the story. It's not about the characters. No. It's just a really bizarre turnaround.
I was just there are 3 scenes that sort of, in my mind, capture all of what we're saying here. And there's one bit where, so on Mark's side of the fence, there's one bit where Watson said, Holmes explains something, and Watson says, oh, of course, why didn't I think of that? And Holmes' response is, because you're an idiot. And I think, no, that is not what Holmes would not say that. Yeah. Holmes, he might mean that, but he wouldn't say that.
He'd mean it, absolutely.
And then at the end of the Reichenbach Fall, Freeman at his best for me is when he's doing this sort of stuff. There's the scene where Holmes comes back and says, in the first episode, where he says, I've seen a lot of action. Yeah. Would you like to see some more? And Freeman goes, oh God, yes. And I thought,
very good.
That's Watson. That is superb.
Yeah.
And at the end of the Reichenbach Fall, when he's at Holmes's grave, and this is pure Freeman, and I'm not a big fan, but this is brilliant stuff to me. He says, just do one more miracle for me, and don't be dead. And he knows it can't happen. Well, to himself, he knows it can't happen. And then what he does is very sort of fondly, puts his fingers on the grave. And then what he does is a military sort of square into the shoulders, stands to attention, does the military turn and walks away as a sign of respect. And I think that is goosebump moment for me.
Yeah, it's a nice moment.
And it's unfortunately it's ruined by then seeing Holmes behind the tree, because I would have preferred it if they'd left him sort of dead, But I think that is Watson, and that is the Watson feeling the way that he will have felt when he thinks Holmes is dead. That is pure Doyle to me, and it's conveyed brilliantly. But I sort of take Mark's point. I don't necessarily agree with it fully, but I sort of take Mark's point that part of the reason that works for me so well is because I take that relationship for granted, not necessarily because I've been shown it. I know that Watson feels for Holmes and vice versa, because I've read all the stories a million times. I've seen all the films. Do these 6 episodes sort of deserve that payoff? Yeah, I'm sort of with Mark a bit. Not quite. But I'd take that infinitely more than what comes after.
Agreed.
The whole thing. I know we're not talking about seriously, but the whole thing on the tube with the bomb with an off switch, and he pretends they're both going to die just to have a bit of fun. He's just mad. Can't stand it. I can't stand it.
No, and I agree with you. And I mean, and this is where I get to say, from kind of a psychological perspective, like Martin Freeman's portrayal of Watson in terms of the PTSD, what the scenes that you described actually ping right upon the PTSD. PTSD oftentimes is, we'll just say it's either sometimes a fear of the action, but there is a way that sometimes PTSD can manifest as returning to normal life is the thing that we fear, because our basically, like our nervous systems, our sympathetic nervous system basically is cued to basically being in the middle of the action, which is exactly why we can see Watson. Oh God, yes, I want to go back. And I agree with you, but I mean, this is also when you're dealing with a character who basically has PTSD, who misses the action, who misses the excitement, he's more likely to put up with somebody who's a ginormous dick. And also because he brings the action. Plus, you also have from this version of Holmes, again, that high functioning sociopathy. Sociopathy is about selective empathy. And so this is why you can get Holmes being a bit of a dick, actually a very ginormous dick, in a lot of contexts. But you see flashes of moments when he is, exhibiting empathy for, Martin Freeman's Watson. But then you also can see when there are times when he's willing to sacrifice, even someone that he cares about and someone that he loves, because sometimes that selective empathy isn't entirely consistent across the board in every single instance when you're dealing with sociopathy. So from a psychological perspective, their relationship actually makes a lot of sense, even though the average viewer isn't necessarily going to buy it because of said problems that you all have laid out.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think more than anything, I think this is one of those moments where it's like, if this could be like, I don't know, John Mann and Bill Bob, a random detective show, you might buy it a little bit more because it is Sherlock Holmes, because one has read the canon. There's these moments you're just like, are you taking it just a little bit too far, Moffat and Gatiss? And I think they sort of got a little bit. I think they got a little, particularly when it comes to series 2 and onwards. I think they got a little ahead of themselves, because I guess what's interesting is sort of I think both of these interpretations, 2009's film and the first and second series of Sherlock, do a fair job of adapting a lot of the basics of the characters and elements of the various stories. But this sort of cultural shift of sort of allowing for making rudeness a fun and quirky character trait is probably did a little bit more harm to both franchises, but also maybe the character as a whole currently. And I think it would have been nice if they had, like I said, I think you do get a bit more sympathy from Robert Downey's Holmes, but I don't think you get nearly enough sympathy with Cumberbatch's Sherlock. I think that just gets pushed so far. Which my question for you guys then is it's fascinating to me that both were successes, massive successes. The Guy Ritchie film, critics generally liked it. Box office was huge, similar to Sherlock, but only one really came out on top as the fandom favorite. The one that sort of, was the what cosplayers were going as, at Comic-Cons and things like that. And that was Sherlock. That was BBC Sherlock. And so I'm before we kind of start to move into other aspects, I'm wondering, why do you think that Sherlock was the one that fandom gravitated towards versus the Downey films? Is it because of the rising fame of Doctor Who? Was that the big thing, or what? Because Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. Everybody loves Marvel. Everyone loves Iron, but that wasn't enough to get his films to this level of sort of I don't know, not even cult status, but just, I don't know, iconic imagery, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that there's the rise of social media. There's basically the push of the pretty face of Benedict Cumberbatch. I mean, he's a pretty boy. He's not my type, but he's definitely I'm married to a software engineer and I love him dearly. But no, he's just the tall, thin, and tortured, portrayal of Holmes, just kind of like works. Plus, you get, again, that it's the cultural zeitgeist kind of, we'll just say, kind of jumped on this. Yeah. It was a production in London that was accessible. People were talking about it. They were, they were able to, we'll just say, they were able to capture, actually, I think, a particular demographic that had not necessarily embraced Sherlock Holmes prior to this. I admit, when I came into the Sherlockian community, it was right as the show was becoming popular, and as a more literary focused traditional Sherlockian, I had to work really hard to separate myself as to be seen within the traditional community as a traditional Sherlockian, as compared to just one of those fangirls who basically was there because Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman are sexy and we want to watch them, or we'll just say we want to read slash fiction about them. I mean, it's just it captured a huge phenomenon, or a new demographic, and especially in the young queer community as well in America.
Mm-hmm. I think that's critical. I mean, I think you've got the rise of definitely social media. I think the fan base is so critical to this. The fact that you have I think it was particularly Tumblr, wasn't it, at the time, was basically becoming like this kind of hotbed for all of the fandoms. All fandoms were sort of using that as a kind of central point. And that meant that, when you got interesting series like BBC Sherlock coming along, people were presenting, were having their own theories, they were having their own conversations in the same way as Sherlockians do now, but you were having it with a whole new demographic who hadn't previously engaged that way. I think there's also the rise of a really big rise in young adult fiction at this point as well. So it really ties into that stuff. I think the iPlayer is hugely important as well, because that it became the way people were consuming it overseas if they couldn't already get it over there. And it's sold to 180 countries. I mean, this was a phenomenal success. So you get, but I think it is at its heart. I think it is the fan conversation, and you even see that influencing the series, don't you? So when
not
you
for the
that,
better, but yes, you do.
But yes, you do. But you get that enormous 2-year gap between the Reichenbach fall and the return. Was it the Empty Hearse? And when they have to retcon or explain away what happened at the end of the second series, they don't really do it. But what they do is they play on all of the fan theories that had come up in the meantime. And you start to get this sense in which this is not to the benefit of the series, but you can see how it is existing in a primarily fandom in a fan-obsessed social media environment, which I think really does go to the heart of why it had so much success. And if you think about things that followed, the formula of let's update Holmes to the present day has continued. So you had Miss Sherlock in Japan in 2018, which I think is
which was
probably
fantastic.
the best thing that followed this is Miss Sherlock.
Agreed.
And then you also had what was the well, you got Elementary, I suppose, as well.
Well, yeah, Elementary was contemporaneous though. That was 2012.
Yeah, that's right. Slightly, yeah, that's right. It just followed hot on the heels, and then you got things like Sherlock Holmes, which is the Indian version, which came out a couple of years ago. So people, that kind of let's update to the modern day is the bit that I think has been very successful. You continue to see that now.
The first season of Sherlock and the Guy Ritchie film have a similar sort of theme story wise. They, obviously, the Cumberbatch series, is three separate, films, 3 separate episodes, but there's the connective tissue is the rise of Moriarty, and that is the exact same thing that is going on in the Guy Ritchie film. I enjoyed both of the way that both handled that. I thought it was quite fun. I thought it was intriguing. I thought the little glimpse that we got of Moriarty in the first Downey Jr. film was a fun little nod, and that the whole sort of scheme that Lord Blackwood, was doing was to doing all these things, but actually what Moriarty really wanted was the radio detonator. That was it. He didn't care if this guy succeeded. He figured this guy probably wasn't going to succeed, but he was going to use him to get that thing, to get that technology. I like that. I thought that was quite fun. That was quite an intelligent thing. That was a good one. And then with BBC, I liked the way things were sort of being peppered through. I liked how Moriarty was essentially sort of blackmailing and forcing everyone to do criminal things. And then once he got hint of Sherlock, he obviously takes it to the extreme in the Great Game, which is to me, I think is one of the strongest episodes of the entire series. We're heading towards a confrontation with Moriarty, and then once we get from there, then we're heading towards the big fall. I do think it'd be worth just briefly touching upon the general storyline of both the film and the series, and getting your takes on how you feel that it was handled with its Moriarty of it all, the kind of building towards Moriarty.
Well, I think both of them do it pretty well. I mean, the part of the issue with Moriarty is that in the original stories, he's just an alter ego of Holmes. He's just a black version of Holmes who turns up, and we don't really get to experience him. It's Holmes's account to Watson, and he was a MacGuffin. That's what he was. Obviously you don't get the payoff in the first Sherlock Holmes film in the same way as you do with The Great Game. But I think it works, it works really well in both, I think.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that at all. And in fact, I mean, I appreciate the idea of like Moriarty lurking in the shadows, kind of as the boogeyman, so to speak. There are some of the Sherlockian adaptations that do it well, and then there are some that do it horrific,ly. These, I mean, the problem is that Moriarty, really only appears in one story of the original stories and is mentioned in the Valley of Fear, so mentioned another story, and so but he is basically the central focus, we'll just say enemy or nemesis of Holmes, and so you get Moriarty, kind of like with Irene Adler. There's not a lot of recurring characters in the Sherlock Holmes stories, and so you get kind of this massive focus in on Moriarty as the villain. You get this massive focus in on Irene Adler often as the love interest, and so basically we see these characters portrayed in different variations and iterations, and again, some are more successfully portrayed than others. This works for me on both accounts. While I thought that Andrew Scott's Moriarty might be just a wee bit over the top for this particular, again, creative universe against this particular Holmes, you need a Moriarty that is that off kilter.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that either. And I think in the stories, Moriarty is just a gimmick, used to purely for one intention, and that is to kill off Holmes. So the idea of Moriarty being in the shadows and only having to come out when absolutely necessary, I think is a great one, because there's not a lot to Moriarty. There's not much there's not a lot of meat on those bones for me.
No.
So less is more as far as I'm concerned with Moriarty. Unless you get someone like Jared Harris, someone who will really take that role and run with it. I think Moriarty can be a bit flat, and I think dare I say, he's a bit overrated as a villain. So yeah, I liked in the Downey Jr. film, I liked the fact that Moriarty was the cliffhanger. And it ends with Holmes saying essentially, right, well, there's something else to go after then. There's someone in those shadows that we need to go and get. But I also liked in the first Cumberbatch series this thread that Moriarty is sort of at the heart of all those cases. It transpires.
Yeah.
That's really well done.
We kind of hit this period of everyone's waiting for the next thing. When is season 2 coming? When is Sherlock Holmes, second film coming? I was very excited when they announced Game of Shadows. I was super looking forward to it. Of course, I was looking forward to BBC Sherlock as well. I just always found it fun that the Downey Jr. films were always one ahead. They always could get their film out before the next series got out. So it just made for a fun little, okay, get your historical version, then you go and watch your contemporary version. All right, they're doing Moriarty. All right, these guys are doing Moriarty. Okay, let's see how they both handle it. But I will say, I remember once seeing the billboard for Game of Shadows, and when I saw the tag, more action, more humor, I got really nervous. Really nervous. And in the same way, when the Staying Alive theme song started to play in A Scandal in Belgravia, I thought, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Which, we could start getting into some of that. Now, we haven't talked about Irene Adler yet. So I do think we should talk about Irene before we gloves off it and talk about Moriarty. Irene Adler has a much bigger role in the first Guy Ritchie film, and then she has a very small role in A Game of Shadows. Personally, I really like Rachel McAdams' Irene Adler. Rachel McAdams is a great actress. I bought her entirely. Again, I found it interesting that both versions of Irene become this sort of she's a blatant criminal working within this Moriarty syndicate. It's funny that both took that exact same approach. Now, the Downey films beat BBC to the punch on that, which sort of made me think, why didn't you do something a little bit different? Guys, she doesn't need to be part of that, but whatever, I get it, but I was a big fan of her, and I am bummed that she was so quickly taken out of A Game of Shadows. I don't know why she was. I don't know if she had other things that she couldn't commit to or whatnot. Like Noomi Rapace's character is a fun alternative, but I would have loved to have seen Irene Adler throughout that whole second film versus be quickly taken off the board in, however, what is one of the most menacing scenes in that film with her sort of we sort of first meet Moriarty with her. But I would love to hear you guys' take on Rachel McAdams, Irene Adler. Monica.
I have to admit, I enjoyed her immensely, and I also bought her as the character, the woman, the one woman to have ever beaten Holmes. Rachel McAdams, at least in the first film, very much portrays the character in that light. She's believable. She's fun. There's definitely that fun flirtation that's going on. So of course, you definitely have the blatant romance aspect amplified within the Robert Downey Jr. film, which I have to admit I don't mind, just because it does add an additional element to the relationship dynamic between the two of them, but I agree that it was a shame that she was written out of Game of Shadows so quickly. But I think the way that it was done basically was essentially to just show genuinely how evil Jared Harris's Moriarty is, his great, the reach that he has, and the fact that he's willing to sacrifice one of the major players and who has direct access to Holmes. For the furthering of his own mechanisms. So like I thought she was well done. But again, I think Noomi Rapace basically was writing the Girl in the Dragon Tattoo series, and perhaps Rachel McAdams, her zenith, had able to say she had reached her zenith and was on the downward spiral that happens in Hollywood. Noomi was hot, Rachel was not, and so.
This was right before Prometheus, because Prometheus was 2012. So this would have been the year, the kind of the that year before. But yeah, real shame. Mark, what's your take on Rachel McAdams, Irene Adler?
Yeah, I like her. I think she does a pretty good job with it. I mean, the thing is that they capture something of the character that I think is inherently in there in the stories. There's a big theory that Conan Doyle based that character in part on Lola Montez, who was like a mid-19th century courtesan, adventurer, actress, and an amazing woman in her own right. And I think where they lean into that works really well. She's very humanly drawn. I think she actually comes across as being convincing. And I think her death scene in Game of Shadows is awful for the simple reason that it got me this time round again, watching it again. It's so throwaway. I had no idea that she was genuinely dead. I thought she was going to come back at the end.
We never saw a body. If they ever were to do a 3, she's definitely meant to come back.
Definitely.
Well, that's why we never saw a body.
But if that's the case, then I think they don't. Again, this question of emotionally earning things, that they could have built up to that death a lot better. It's not signposted as being a big event, and so watching it again this time, I thought, as I was watching it, I was thinking, oh, does she come back at the end of this? I can't remember if she comes back at the end of this, but it really felt like it actually felt like it was an accident in the scripting. That's what,
Apparently they were attempting to go for whether this is true or not, or apocryphal, apparently they were trying to go for a Bond girl-esque approach with the franchise, with a new girl each film, which, nah.
Oh, God. Really?
Basically, she's got this little cameo that sort of disappointed. You know. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I like her. I think she's good. I like Monica. I can buy her. She seems to be the adventuress that the King of Bohemia calls her. I'm all in for Rachel McAdams. What can I say? I'm not sure she could be at La Scala. But we can't have everything in life, but I think in the context of this film, I mean, she's a great sort of swashbuckler in her own right. At the end of the film, she's right in there in the action, and I think it's good to see it. It's I quite like Irene Adler being at the heart of everything and being at the center of the fighting and the stunts and everything. I think it makes a nice change, and and she. I'm not saying that she's my ideal sort of picture of what Irene Adler may have looked like, but I don't think she's that far off. And so, I think she's one of the best things in the film, I have to say.
Well, and also, I mean, because with the Robert Downey Jr. films, they ramping up the action on Irene as well. Absolutely makes sense to have her, Irene Adler, basically work with Robert Downey Jr.'s very actiony Holmes as well.
This is an instance where I think the Guy Ritchie films did the character better than the BBC did. Let's talk Laura Pulver's Irene, dominatrix Irene Adler. When I watched this episode, New Year's Day, 2012, I just kind of sunk in my chair. I remember that feeling the next day, being at work, sitting with my desk with just watch Sherlock. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it. I think they kind of fucked up Irene Adler. No, it was great. It was great. I was like, no, I actually think they really fucked up this character. And the only it's complicated because I in many ways I really like this episode. I think there's a lot of strong parts to it. But seeing this as a adaptation of Irene, it's so stupidly off the mark that it just felt like massive arrogance on Moffat and Gatiss' side. If you sort of go back and you watch a lot of Moffat written stuff, there is this sort of over sexualized component to his writing and to his portrayal of characters, that this felt like he was let loose and able to do anything he wanted. And when you have Irene Adler totally stark naked for nothing more than just gratuitous exploitation, I just thought, fuck, no. And this for me was really the writing on the wall that I think we were very quickly heading towards a decline with the series. And it starts with Irene Adler, follows on with the Hound, momentarily blips with, I think, the last episode. Okay, we're getting back to where we should be, and then we never quite recover. I hated Laura Pulver's Irene. I can only watch that episode if I see her as someone who's not Irene. She's the woman who beat Holmes, literally beat him with the writing. All right, fuck off. But then at the end, she goes through all that, and then she becomes a fucking damsel in distress. So yeah, I really did not like this version of Irene Adler whatsoever. I thought it was exploitative. I thought it was unnecessary. I thought it just completely missed the point of her, and to have her go from exploitation to damsel in distress just sort of killed what was interesting about the character.
When I first saw it, I was thinking, wow, this is how they decided to portray Irene Adler. And while I will just say there's a part of me that appreciates the idea of weaponizing her sexuality, and basically kind of taking what is usually something that is so exceedingly vulnerable place for women, and and often exploited, and having her be the one to weaponize it and make it into something of power, spoke to me initially, but upon rewatch, I don't think it quite holds up. Plus, there's those inconsistencies where she is this completely badass, like this badass character, who is blackmailing people and dealing with all of these things, and then turning her into, again, that damsel in distress in the end. It felt like kind of fan service, and then of course undermining everything that was positive about this particular character. As much as I enjoy Laura Pulver as an actress, upon subsequent viewings, this just doesn't work for me.
No. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, it doesn't work for me either. I think it's a cheap gag, just the woman who beat Holmes. Irene Adler is famous for being the only woman to beat Holmes, so they make her into a dominatrix. I think that's a pretty cheap schoolyard gag, really.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do the original character any service whatsoever. I think it's a total wasted opportunity. And when you look back at some of the really good Irene Adlers that we've had, I'd watch any of those over this one any day of the week. And she's not. The character isn't consistent. She's meant to be this sort of strong, independent, dangerous woman. But the minute Holmes does that bit where he works out what her password is on the phone, she just crumbles. Is almost in tears. And you think, well, that's a really and then she's sort of begging for help. And then, like you say, Luke, at the end, she is a damsel in distress that needs saving. It's such a real quick downward spiral. And it's just totally inconsistent to me. What I will say is that the music that he writes for her, Irene's theme on the soundtrack, and the track called Sherlocked, which is what's playing when he reveals that, are both beautiful pieces of music. But that's as much as I can say about Irene in this, because I think she's a waste. I think it's just
I think I was going to add one quick thing before I pass over to you, Mark. And I think this might be a situation where this is a style over substance situation, where the episode "A Scandal in Belgravia" is so beautifully shot. There are so many dynamic, truly dynamic scenes, really dynamic stuff going on, and the music it skyrockets to a whole other level in this season as well. And that piece that he writes for her, as you said, Matt, is very moving. And so there's a lot of these different components that I think are maybe blinded audiences to some degree when this first came out. That this is so great, because what I'm seeing looks pretty cool, but what I'm seeing and what's actually happening aren't the same thing.
I have to admit, like flipping back to the Robert Downey Jr. film for a moment, Stephen Fry, whom I adore, but Stephen Fry's Naked Mycroft didn't quite work. Yeah. This didn't quite work. And this is so much worse. Yeah. I mean, I can at least buy-ish Stephen Fry's Naked Mycroft, but Holmes being in a bedsheet at Buckingham Palace?
No.
Ugh.
No, not at all. No. Mark, what's your take on Laura Pulver's Irene Adler?
Well, not much different to what you've already said, really. I would say that I'm slightly more favorable towards her for the first half of the episode, for the simple reason that I think there's a shock factor, and this is symptomatic of where the series is going wrong. But I think there's a shock factor to it that does work. And yes, the whole thing about beating Holmes is silly, but it's one of those things where it's an intellectual conceit that works really well on paper, and the moment you start to put it on the screen, it starts to fall apart. And the big problem for me is that they don't. Frankly, if they'd have stuck with the character and given her more agency and doubled down on it, I would have more respect for it than what actually happens, which is that she basically just needs Holmes to come in and rescue her. And I'm afraid this is a Stephen Moffat trope. This is an element of, strong woman wish fulfillment, but ultimately is going to be saved by a man turning up. And we've seen that. We see that in Doctor Who. We see that in lots of those things as well. It's just,
I mean, and I know I agree with you. My one of my favorite side characters in Doctor Who, River Song, ended up becoming exactly this trope.
Exactly,
it crushed my soul.
But just to pick up on something that I think few of you said really is about the visual look of that episode. It is astonishing. There are some fantastic moments. Cumberbatch has some great bits, and I do think that part of the challenge with this episode is that the reason I think they ultimately go with the dominatrix character is just because they are focusing on the idea of the comedy, of the impossible Holmes feeling incredibly not being able to cope in that situation. They're just going to lever that as much as they possibly can. But again, it's one of those things that works well for half a scene and works well on paper, but you start to put it on screen, it just falls over very, very quickly.
Do you know the big problem with the disguise, Mr. Holmes? However hard you try, it's always a self-portrait.
You think I'm a vicar with a bleeding face?
I think you're damaged, delusional, and believe in a higher power. In your case, it's yourself. And somebody loves you. Well, if I had to punch that face, I'd avoid your nose and teeth too.
Could you put something on, please?
Both A Game of Shadows and the second season of Sherlock are all heading towards one big thing, and that is the fall, the big showdown, the final big showdown between Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes. I mean, this was one of the aspects that I was super excited by. I wanted to see how this was going to play out. But let's dive into Jared Harris's Moriarty before we tap into Andrew Scott's Jim Moriarty. I'm a big fan of Jared Harris's Professor Moriarty. I think Jared Harris was fantastic. Probably the best thing in that film. He is dark, he is menacing, he is terrifying. His performance makes, when him and Downey have to go head to head, that's when Downey finally has to pull his britches up and do some acting. And you feel it in those scenes between those two. The simple scene of those two in the classroom, fantastic. Brilliant. It's simple, it's quiet, but it's menacing. We mentioned the Irene Adler scene, but also the bit of him seeing Don Giovanni and also telling Moran that you can't come see the show. You gotta go assassinate someone. Oh, shame. I was really looking forward to that. There was such a presence from his Moriarty that I really, really bought into. That duality of this upstanding professor is also this terrible criminal mastermind. 100% sold for me.
I agree with that. I think he's fantastic. I think the great thing about him is that he feels deadly, and Moriarty really needs to feel deadly. Andrew Scott does not feel deadly, but this guy feels like he could, he will finish you off pretty quick. I think he has a very. It's really interesting. I think you often get. This is one of those strange moments where I feel like you get Holmes gets the Moriarty he deserves. In the Paget illustrations, you get somebody who is a kind of darker, evil version of Sherlock Holmes. In the Brett series, you get the fantastic Eric Porter. And here you actually get a Moriarty who is a massive cut above Holmes. The bit that doesn't work for me is the fight scene. I think the fight scene is quite ludicrous. The whole idea that I think it's stupid. So now we've got Holmes vision, now we've got Moriarty vision, and it's just crass. Honestly, apart from anything else, I do not believe that Moriarty. I know they have a big fight and they fall off a waterfall. Yeah, okay, we know that's in the stories, or that's what's meant to have happened in the stories. But I have never bought the idea that they come to fisticuffs. Just don't buy it at all. And so in this situation, I think it's much more likely that Moriarty would have found a way of just pushing Holmes off the waterfall.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mark's points. I can genuinely appreciate the fact that Moriarty doesn't exactly seem like he's a man of equal action and or physical prowess as Holmes. That's part of what separates the two of them, even though I know that there's the Jungian shadow work, et cetera, Holmes Moriarty. But it just so I that is the one aspect of Jared Harris's Moriarty that I didn't buy. Everything else absolutely spot on. And I think in terms of the portrayals of Moriarty, basically Eric Porter is my exemplar, but Jared Harris comes in a close second. Just because he's truly believable as that criminal mastermind, as somebody who is deadly, who is multiple steps ahead of everyone, as well as being the spider in the center of the web and pulling the different strings. And Jared Harris is just a phenomenal actor. I will watch anything that he's in.
He's one of those great sort of charming villains that will kill you with a smile, But he is also everything that Doyle says. I believe him as a mathematics professor. I believe that all the people sitting in that lecture hall think he's totally harmless. I also believe he's an absolute lunatic and a mastermind. I never bought that Holmes and Moriarty came to fisticuffs in Doyle's story because of their difference in age. Yeah. I can't believe that these two come to fisticuffs. I have to
definitely say. I do too. 100%.
I can't believe these two come to fisticuffs. And I also like the fact that we, totally against Mark on Moriarty vision, because I quite like the fact that as well as parrying blows, they're parrying thoughts. By the time this fight scene happens, I already think I'm in a ludicrous comic book action flick.
Yeah, there's plastic surgery that changes people's faces perfectly in the Victorian period. We're so far beyond reality that
Holmes has somehow sewn a suit that means he can be camouflaged himself into a plant.
I hate that.
Yeah, well, that's
nonsense. The whole thing's nonsense.
But the weird thing watching Game of Shadows again, I was really surprised that actually the last half hour is tonally darker than I remember it.
It's very good.
It's really noticeable because for all you're right, Luke, about all the it's funnier, it's bigger, it's brasher, and blah blah blah. Actually, you get the moment after you get to the kind of factory, and from that moment to the end, with the exception of the coda, obviously. It's really quite dark. It's we've got past Stephen Fry in the nude chatting up Mary Morstan, which is just like that's enough. it's just insane. But that whole last 20 minutes, and I think you're right, Luke, about when you get Harris and Robert Downey Jr. together, it forces him to do something. It forces Robert Downey Jr. to actually try. Whereas I just think the rest of the movie is just not bothered at all.
No. I mean, I get to say because you're talking about it, I love the whatever tower they're in where Harris is torturing Holmes. He sticks the meat hook through him. Fuck me. That was just like, and he was loving it, and they're playing that operatic song behind it. It's just like, it's so demented. It's sort of, they're clearly aping on this is Batman and Joker.
Yeah.
And but without feeling parody, it's one of those, that's a standout moment to me. But I also love some of the other action bits sort of around that period. I do love the bit where they're running through the woods and they're being blasted at with the big cannons. I think that's a fantastic bit. Yeah, it's the opening half, that fucking opening where he's walking through like Covent Garden and he's being followed and he has some stupid fight and he spits a coffee bean in someone's eye. Like, I fucking hate that shit. Like, it was stupid. I hate the urban camouflage bullshit. There's too many. It's a Game of Shadows is a frustrating one because there's all these little blips of like, oh, this is really cool, but you have to get through a lot of crap to get to it. But then once I do agree with that last kind of chunk, 30-ish minutes of the film is genuinely really good. I like Watson in the room with I can't remember Noomi Rapace's character's name now. But that bit where they are in the room using Holmes's methods. Use my methods. Like, again, they're very reverential to they're using Holmes's methods to find her brother and stop the thing. And I was like, it's all, I dug that while these two dudes are out there on the on the balcony playing chess and coming to blows eventually. And I like that Holmes's realization is that the only way to stop him is to take us both out. Like, I just like, I like where they go with that. It's just that there is a lot of goofy, hard to stomach stuff that is like with the Mycroft stuff, with the I don't like Watson's birthday or stag do. I don't like the wedding scene. There's a lot of goofy shit that you got to get through to get to the good stuff.
I did a rewatch, and I have to admit I fast forwarded through a lot of it just because I didn't get a lot of it. And I just really wanted to focus in on that last 30-minute chunk because that is like brilliant. That's I found myself when I saw it in the theater, because again, these were released on Christmas Day in America. And so my poor husband being dragged to the theater. So, I mean, it's we'll just say, the film itself in general, is just, it's a hodgepodge, very brilliant moments, some very not so great moments. But again, you watch it, if you avoid the coda at the end, and you just focus in on, kind of the action, that last 30 minutes of action towards the end, then it's absolutely wonderful and brilliant. And it works, although the coda is necessary because, we do live in a world of signaling potential sequels.
Do you know what happens if you don't leave me alone, Sherlock? To you?
Oh, let me guess. I get killed.
Kill you? No, don't be obvious. I mean, I'm gonna kill you anyway someday. I don't want to rush it, though. I'm saving it up for something special. No. If you don't stop prying, I will burn you. I will burn the heart out of you.
So I really enjoyed Andrew Scott's first appearance in The Great Game. I thought the pool scene generally was good, and he was menacing, and he was clearly, there was a menace, there was an unhinged, there was a chaotic component to him, and I liked it. The minute we are back in that pool scene and his fucking phone goes off and it's playing Staying Alive, You can on one of our recent episodes we were bitching about the new Dexter show, and they do the same fucking gag. One of the detectives, whenever she's investigating a crime scene, is playing Sting. It's just so goddamn. It's so stupid. Just don't do it. Don't fucking do it. It instantly pulled me out, ruined the mood, and set the tone for me with Sherlock for the rest of the series. From season 2 all the way to the end of 4. It just sort of set my expectations of like, I think you're going to get on my nerves now.
Yeah.
And once we get to the Reichenbach fall, and this is where, Mark, you mentioned earlier that, the Downey films are being quite reverential and lovingly kind of looking at the Holmes canon both on screen and the Doyle's work. Here, I think it's starting to get a little bit too stupid. There's the whole stealing of the crown jewels, which is from the Rathbone film that's
from
sort of
the Adventures,
that kind of apes on that kind of stuff. But here it's just so him going into that room and dancing around and putting the gum into a smiley face and bashing it with a diamond and sitting in there with the crown. I was like, okay, it was hard to stomach for me. I don't know. I really wish I could say that I loved it, but this is what I think I will caveat say, I think at the time I was more forgiving of it. As time has gone on, I'm less and less and less and less forgiving of it, to the point to where I don't even see the pool scene Jim and Reichenbach Jim as the same person.
Yeah,
they had to get out a jail free card. They had one. They could have used the twin card, and I would have bought it because he has a brother. They could have fucking used it. I would have allowed it. But because they didn't and they stuck to it, I thought, nah. What he does on the roof, I don't buy it.
I don't buy it.
No.
I don't buy it either.
I don't buy it. So he's frustrating.
I can't stand it. I genuinely can't stand it. I sort of agree with you, Luke, that when he first appears at the pool, I did think, "Ooh, this isn't." When he's saying, "I will burn the heart of you,"
the great line.
I'm thinking, now this is quite good. This is quite interesting, and it is killed stone dead when that phone goes off. Yeah. It's a cheap gag for a start, and it's not fun. It's not funny. But why on earth would this psychopath have "Staying Alive" as his ringtone? It doesn't even make sense as a character. Beats me.
No.
And then the whole thing, when he visits Holmes in Baker Street, and he's saying things like, "Honey, you should see me in a crown," and all that stuff. I can't. All the menace has gone. All the threat has gone. He's just become, like a pantomime villain that you're meant to hiss. The bit on the roof, I don't buy anything that he does in this episode. I get the point that it's all to frame Holmes. Yeah, fine, fair enough. But why does Moriarty not want to sort of, enjoy his success of defeating Holmes?
I love a camp villain. So I'm all in for camp villains. I'm quite happy with camp villains. I quite like him in The Great Game. I think that moment at the end works really well. I watched that one and Reichenbach Fall again recently. And what was really apparent in Reichenbach Fall is that it is a script that has been a script and a performance that have followed a sort of sleeper cult success of that first scene. And they're now then playing it in full knowledge of what the audience really liked of the first scene. And I have to say, the script of the Reichenbach Fall is terrible. It is awful. It does not hang together. It does one thing that is really fascinating, I think, which is that, from Nick Meyer's time in the 70s, you've got this whole idea that Moriarty could be a figment of Holmes's imagination. And so to riff off that and to come up with that as being a thread within that episode, I thought is really neat. But the moment you think beyond the spectacle for 10 seconds is the moment you go, this is absolute nonsense. None of this works. None of it makes sense at all. And then you add to it the fact that Andrew Scott is now playing it in full knowledge of the fact that, there have been these huge outpouring of fan love on online about how fantastic the character is, and it just feeds the beast. And so you get this absolutely impossible characterization. And the end, I mean, just the whole mechanics of the way that plot is set up, and the scene on the rooftop, it's just really bad. It just really does not work. I mean, I'm not sufficiently interested, having rewatched it, to watch the next episode and work out how they even try to fit it, because I remember they didn't really
They don't actually tell you. They make three options, and none of them actually are what happened. They don't have the balls to actually commit to anything.
No.
It's so much fan service that it feels disrespectful.
Yeah.
Well, I seem to remember them saying no one's going to work out how we did it, and then everyone came out on the internet and said, "Well, it's the squash ball and the laundry basket."
Yeah.
And I always had a vision of Moffat and Gatiss going, "Oh, damn." Everyone guessed it straight away. So then they said, "Well, we won't explain it. You know, our way out of this, our clever way out of this, in inverted commas, is to not explain it." That was always my take on it.
Yeah. I mean,
Moriarty is fantastic in the Great Game, but he's only in it for 4 minutes.
Oh yeah, that's why.
So, after that,
sometimes Lessiarty is better than Moriarty.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm so sorry, bad dad joke, but no, I agree. I mean, in terms of the payoff between Reichenbach Fall and the Empty Hearse, the Empty Hearse with the fan theories, it just feels exceedingly masturbatory, and it just and disrespectful, and that is the moment that truly turned me off from the series.
Same.
But I mean, I continued to watch it out of a sense of obligation and loyalty, and also just to kind of see what they did with with The Abominable Bride when they did the period episode. But otherwise, the series itself, for myself, from my headcanon, if you will, ends at Reichenbach Fall.
I think this also sort of speaks to just general, if one is to go and study the Moffat and his writing and how things sort of, the trajectory of how things go. His first season of Doctor Who, show running Doctor Who, is really damn good. That season 5 with Matt Smith's introduction, there's cracking episode after cracking
episode. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Again, really becomes a victim of his own success. Once you start getting into season 6, it's like, oh, okay, you're too self-aware of what was successful, and now you're milking it, and then you keep doing that, and then you keep doing that, and then you keep fucking doing that. Please stop doing that.
Yep.
It just gets tiring. And I think with Sherlock, he had the ability to do it much quicker. Him and Gatiss had the ability to do much quicker, to kind of bank on and milk the things that intrigued and fans and fandom, and then just sort of crank them up to 11 stupid, as Mark Kermode would like to say. And it just leaves me by the end of the by the end of the Reichenbach Fall, I definitely was like, oh shit, I really wanted to see how they get out of this. This is a little bit, I don't really buy what they did with Moriarty, but I was definitely intrigued to see how they got out of it. But I also don't think that post the Fall, the magic of that era of 2009 to 2012, I don't really think that magic ever returned. I think season 3 came out, season 4 came out, no more third film for Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law because of Marvel, basically. Like, I just don't, there was as you said, Monica, you watched it because it was out of kind of obligation, out of curiosity. But I think Cumberbatch's, his Sherlock, when he fell off of Bart's, kind of signified really the end of modern Sherlock, where modern Sherlock being an interesting thing came to an end. And we've just sort of been writing that, that was the rock in the pond, and as is the beginning, we're at the tail end of a ripple that is still sort of from all that, but isn't quite as good, isn't quite as dynamic, isn't quite as vivid. But the whole thing kind of felt done after the Fall.
Well, I mean, so at least on the American fandom side, that's actually when the fandom really took off. And a lot of the fandom embraced the John Locke conspiracy. So the whole, homoeroticism between Holmes and Watson. I mean, and so like this, basically in the hiatuses between the seasons is really when the fandom came out to play. Now, again, as a traditional Sherlockian, observing this from the outside, this cultural phenomenon from the outside, or at least trying to be on the outside of it while some of the people were grouping me into it and trying to drive me into it. It was a very unique and challenging time, I think, to basically be part of the community here in America, because you definitely had this push-pull of this new fandom coming in, and then also now coming into more traditionally Sherlockian spaces. And so there was very much for lack of a better term, kind of a culture war happening at that time, which have subsequently cooled because post, with the diminishment of the series in season 3, as well as season 4, when it petered to like a grinding halt. Basically the momentum of that fandom basically also diminished as well. And so what you have left now in 2026 are the people who embraced the literature, who embraced the, basically embraced the core. So the, for lack of a better term, the Sherlockians versus the fans, if that makes sense. We're all fans, but Sherlockians are a little bit more of the die-and-wool, fans that are interested in multiple Sherlockian properties versus just the sexiness as Benedict Cumberbatch.
One sort of outstanding question is, would you ever want to see a sequel to either now? At this point in time, would you want a series 5 of Sherlock, or would you really want Robert Downey Jr. Jude Law to return for a third film?
No, kill it.
Yeah, I don't want anymore.
I think its time has passed. Although, I mean, there is that morbid curiosity for me of what would be like. I would like to see, if I were going to see something, Robert Downey Jr.'s and Jude Law's Holmes and Watson, come back for something maybe less explodey, less action-packed, but a little bit more cerebral, like that more settled post-Reichenbach Sherlock Holmes. That could be interesting. But the coda at the end of the last episode of season 4 of BBC Sherlock, that was it. Even though the last 2 seasons were god-awful, that coda, that last 5 minutes, redeemed the series just a little bit, just enough to make me feel a little bit satisfied about where they ended it. And now let's kill it. It deserves to be done.
It's clear that there's always going to be an appetite for Sherlock Holmes. I as you said, I don't think none of us really want to see either of these two franchises continue. Leave them in the past. They're fun to revisit. They're fun to dissect and reevaluate. But Holmes since has continued in various different forms and will continue. The question is, when will it be? When will we get the one that matches that level of sort of that peaks with fandom in the way that this does? I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think we're still quite a ways away from that, because look, we're getting Victorian Sherlock. We have it with Enola Holmes. We have it with Young Sherlock. Young Sherlock is one of the highest watched shows on Amazon Prime ever. It's getting huge numbers. Second series is coming. So there's appetite, but the way it sort of captures, Holmes is going to have to, the way it was reinvented for the early 2010s is going to have to be reinvented in a very, very different way to sort of capture a global audience again in a world of streaming and high competition. Well, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to do this, everyone. Well, Mark, anything happening with Doings of Doyle? What you want to do a little bit of a shout out? What's happening over there?
Well, we're still recording the podcast. We're on to episode 75 this month, which is quite amazing. But yeah, so each month we look at a different story by Conan Doyle, something that he wrote that might be Sherlockian or non-Sherlockian, and that's going great guns. And then the other half of my Sherlockian fandom, I'm editing the Sherlock Holmes Journal for the London Society now.
Mark, do you want to what's social? What's your handle so everyone knows how to go and find you?
best one to do is probably Blue Sky, and it's at Doings of Doyle.
There we go. So check out Doings Doyle. Thank you, Mark, for coming back on the show. Thank you, Monica, for your first appearance on Cinema Sleuths. Hope to bring you back. There's more Holmes topics that we could always mine amongst other things. But this was a lot of fun. We look forward to bringing you guys back on. But we will be back next week with another investigation. So in the meantime, take care walking down those mean cinematic streets.